It was Christmas night when my son placed a box in front of me. Inside were car keys. "A new start for you, Dad," he said, smiling wide. Everyone clapped. He wrapped his arm around his wife, the perfect family man. But I never drove that car. While he stepped into the kitchen, she leaned close. "Robert, do you mind if I take it?" I forgot champagne for the table. I nodded. "Go ahead." She snatched the keys, kissed him on the cheek, and left before he even noticed. An hour later, his phone lit up. He frowned, dialed her number. No answer. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. His face darkened. He called again. This time, someone picked up. "Sir, this is the police. Are you a relative of the woman driving this vehicle?" He froze. The color drained from his face. His knees buckled. The phone nearly slipped from his hands. "What happened?" he whispered. "There's been an accident. She's alive. But we need you to come down." He dropped into the chair, trembling, unable to speak. His whole body shook like he'd seen a ghost. And that was the moment I knew something wasn't right. But let's not rush. My name is Robert Miller. I'm 60 years old. I worked construction most of my life. I never had much, but I had enough. Enough to raise my son, to keep a roof over our heads, to give him opportunities one never had. I'm not a man of wealth or status. I'm just a father. And on Christmas night, my own son looked me in the eye and handed me keys to a car that could have killed me. At first, I tried to believe it was an accident. That's what the police told us. The brakes failed. A tragic malfunction. Wrong place, wrong time. But something about it clawed at me. Brakes don't just fail on a new car. And the way my son reacted, falling to his knees, trembling, his face drained of life, it wasn't the look of a man worried about his wife. It was the look of a man watching his plan collapse. We spent the night at the hospital. His wife lay in bed, bruised but alive. She whispered about the crash, how the pedal went straight to the floor, how the wheel locked as the car spun out. My son sat beside her, holding her hand, nodding, telling her everything would be fine. But he couldn't stop shaking. His eyes darted, his leg bounced, his hands clenched tight. I stayed quiet, but I watched. I've spent my life around men. I know fear when I see it. And he was afraid. Not of losing her. Not of the accident. He was afraid of the truth coming out. The next day, the official report was brief. Mechanical failure. The word sat heavy on the page. I couldn't accept it. That night, lying in bed, I kept hearing his voice. "A new start for you, Dad." If I had been the one driving, I wouldn't be here. That thought burned into my mind. It wasn't her seat. It was mine. The following days blurred together. Friends visited. Neighbors called. Everyone offering sympathy. "Thank God she survived," they said. "What a terrible accident." But inside, I couldn't let it go. Because accidents don't feel like setups. And this felt like a setup. I started digging quietly. Asking questions without making it obvious. Where was the car now? Who had it? It didn't take long to find out it had been hauled to a yard outside of town. Insurance would look it over, but it would take weeks. I didn't want weeks. I wanted answers. So I made a call to an old friend, a mechanic named Jack. We'd worked together years ago on job sites. He owed me a favor. "The car is totaled," I told him. "But I need to see it. I need you to look at it." There was silence on the line before he spoke. "Robert, are you sure? If this is about the brakes, you might not like what we find." "I need to know," I said. "All right, meet me at the yard tomorrow night. I'll get you in." I hung up, staring at the wall. In my gut, I already knew. That car wasn't a gift. It was a trap. And the only reason I was alive was because she had taken my seat. The night after Christmas, I drove out of town. The streets were quiet. The snow pressed into ice under the tires. Jack had told me to meet him at the yard after dark. I pulled up to the gate and saw him waiting, cigarette glowing in the cold. "You sure about this, Robert?" he asked. "I need to know." He nodded and pushed the gate open. Inside, the yard stretched silent, rows of broken cars under floodlights. And there, tucked into a corner, sat the wreck. My gift. The bow was gone. The hood crumpled, the windshield spiderwebbed, metal twisted, glass shattered. It didn't look like a gift anymore. It looked like a coffin. Jack walked around it with a flashlight, running his hand along the frame. "Accident, huh?" he muttered. "Funny thing about accidents." I stood back, heart hammering, as he popped the hood. The beam of light cut through the shadows, landing on the brake line. Jack crouched low, studying it. His silence stretched too long. "What do you see?" I asked. He glanced up, his face tight. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone tampered with it. My stomach dropped. He pointed with the flashlight. "Look here. The line's been cut, then sealed with cheap epoxy. It held just long enough. Heat, pressure, it was going to fail. No way this happens by accident." The words echoed in the cold night. No way this happens by accident. I stepped closer, gripping the edge of the hood. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from rage. Jack leaned back. "Robert, who gave you this car?" I didn't answer. My throat was dry. My mind was loud. My son's face. His smile. "A new start for you, Dad." I forced the words out. "My son." Jack stared at me. "Then you already know, don't you?" I said nothing. We circled the wreck, Jack pointing out more details. Loose bolts where nothing should be loose. A replaced part that didn't match the manufacturer. Every inch told the same story. The car had been prepared, not broken. I felt sick. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Someone had tried to kill me, and that someone lived under my roof. Back home, I sat in the dark, the file from the police in my lap. They called it a malfunction, but Jack's words replayed in my head. Cut, sealed, meant to fail. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not the police, not friends, not family. If I moved too fast, the whole thing would disappear. My son was too careful for that. So I kept quiet, and I started watching. The first crack showed the next morning. He came into the kitchen, phone in hand, voice low. He thought I wasn't listening. "Yeah," he whispered. "No, it didn't work. Don't call me here. We'll talk later." I froze. He turned, saw me, and forced a smile. "Morning, Dad." I nodded, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, the fire grew hotter. He wasn't alone. Someone else had been part of this. That night, I opened a notebook and started writing. Dates, times, phone calls, every word, every slip, every detail. Because if I was going to bring him down, I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. The following day, I went back to Jack. He handed me photos he'd taken at the yard. Close-ups of the cut brake line, the epoxy, the mismatched parts. "Keep these safe," he said. "They're proof." I tucked them away, heart heavy. Proof that my son had turned against me. Proof that my own blood wanted me gone. That night, I sat alone, staring at the photos under the lamp. My son laughed upstairs with his wife, acting like nothing had happened. I clenched my fists. This wasn't over. Because if he had help, I needed to know who. And when I found out, I promised myself I would make every one of them pay. I couldn't get the sound of his voice out of my head. The way he whispered on the phone that morning. Thinking I wasn't listening. "No, it didn't work. Don't call me here. We'll talk later." He wasn't alone. Someone was helping him. The thought ate at me all day. Who was on the other end of that call? That night, I made another call of my own. Not to Jack this time. To another old contact. Someone who had access to phone records. "I need a favor," I said quietly. "My son's calls. Last week. Just numbers, nothing more." He hesitated. "Robert, you know this isn't exactly." "I know. I cut in. But I need it." By the next evening, an envelope slid across the counter at a diner. Inside was a simple printout, a list of numbers. And one of them stopped me cold. I knew it by heart, because I dialed it myself 100 times over the years. Tom Reeves, my neighbor, my friend. We'd lived side by side for more than 20 years. Shared barbecues, birthdays, 4th of July fireworks. When my wife passed, he was the first man at my door, casserole in hand. He was family in everything but blood. And my son had been calling him. repeatedly. I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Tom was helping with the car. Maybe it was something innocent. But my gut wouldn't let it go. The next morning, I walked over, coffee in hand, just like old times. Tom was in the garage, tinkering with his tools. He looked up, surprised. "Robert," he said, wiping his hands. "Haven't seen you in a while." I forced a smile. "Yeah, been busy. Thought I'd check in." We talked small things, weather, the holidays, his grandkids. He was calm, too calm. But then I saw it. On the workbench, a box of epoxy. The same kind Jack had pointed out on the brake line. My chest tightened. Tom noticed my stare and quickly slid the box under a rag. "Projects," he muttered. "You know how it is." I nodded slowly, hiding the storm inside me. We talked a little longer, but my eyes kept going back to that box. Every word out of his mouth sounded heavier, faker. Finally, I excused myself. "Good seeing you, Tom." "Anytime," he said with that same easy smile he'd worn for years. But now I saw it differently. It wasn't friendly. It was guilty. Back home, I pulled out my notebook, wrote his name in bold letters. Tom Reeves. The betrayal cut deep. I'd trusted him. I'd leaned on him. And now, he was working with my son to bury me. Why? What could he possibly gain? That night, I watched from my window. Tom's lights were still on, and just before midnight, I saw a figure leave his house, head down, moving quick. My son, he didn't even look my way, just climbed into his car and drove off. The sight confirmed what I already knew. They were in this together. The next day, I went back to Jack, showed him the number, told him what I'd seen. He frowned. "You're saying your son's partner is your neighbor?" I nodded. Jack shook his head. "That's worse than I thought. If he's tied to this, it means there's more going on. People don't risk this kind of thing for nothing. He's getting something out of it." I swallowed hard. "Then I need to know what." Jack leaned in. "Careful, Robert. You start digging too fast. They'll see it coming." But I couldn't stop. Not now. That evening, I confronted my son, casually. "I saw Tom yesterday. He asked about you." He froze just for a second, barely enough to notice. Then he forced a laugh. "Yeah, he called to wish me Merry Christmas. Nice guy." I smiled back like I believed him, but inside, the fire burned hotter, because now I knew the truth. He was lying, and he was lying badly. Late that night, I opened my notebook again. On one page, photos of the brake line, the epoxy. On the other, phone records, Tom's number circled in red. Two names stared back at me. My son, my friend, the two people I should have trusted most. And together, they'd tried to put me in a grave. I closed the book, my hand shaking. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. And if Tom Reeves thought I was going to roll over and die, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The betrayal weighed on me like a stone. My son and Tom, two people I trusted most. Together, they had tried to cut me out of life itself. But I still didn't know why. I spent the next days pretending nothing was wrong, pretending I hadn't seen the epoxy in Tom's garage, pretending I hadn't watched my son slip out his house at midnight. But inside, every nerve was on fire. I needed to know the reason, because no one risks murder without a prize. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 nights later, I heard voices through the wall. My son was in the backyard with Tom, speaking low. I killed the lights in my room, cracked the window, and listened. "You told me it would be simple," my son hissed. "One drive, one accident, and it's done." Tom grunted. "It should have been. She wasn't supposed to take the car." Silence. Then my son spoke again, voice sharp. "We can't wait forever. The house is in his name. The accounts are in his name. I need control now, not 10 years from now." My blood ran cold. That was it. My home, my savings, my life's work. That was what they were after. I gripped the windowsill, jaw clenched, as Tom replied, "Relax. He's old. No one will question it when it happens. We'll try again. You'll get what you want. and I'll get my cut. My cut. So that was Tom's role. He wasn't just helping out of loyalty to my son. He was in on it for money, maybe the land, maybe both. I stepped back from the window, fists shaking. For years, I'd invited that man into my house, trusted him with my family, and now he was bargaining with my son for pieces of my life, like I was already gone. The next morning, I made my move. I walked down to the bank, calm on the outside, storm on the inside. I asked about my accounts, about the house deed, about the insurance policies. Everything was still in my name. But that wouldn't last, not with them plotting. So I quietly updated things. Passwords, signatures, security questions. I tightened every lock they might try to pick. If they wanted my world, they'd have to fight for it. That night, I slipped into Tom's garage when he wasn't home. The door was always loose. He'd never bothered to fix it. I searched through drawers, cabinets, shelves, and then I found it, an envelope tucked behind a box of nails. Inside were papers, notes scribbled in my son's handwriting, numbers, figures, my address circled, a rough timeline, and at the bottom, a single line. After it's done, we transfer everything. My hands shook as I read it. Everything. That was me. I slipped the papers into my jacket and left as quietly as I came. Back home, I spread them out under the lamp. The handwriting was unmistakable. The signatures, the calculations, it was all his. Proof, not just of an accident, but of a plan. The next morning, I looked at him differently. He sat at the table with his wife, pouring coffee, smiling like nothing was wrong. She had no idea. She thought she'd just been unlucky that night. But I knew the truth. Her husband and our neighbor had turned my life into a business deal, and she was never meant to be the one behind the wheel. Later that day, I confronted Tom indirectly. You still thinking about selling that land behind your house? I asked casual as I could. He froze for a split second before forcing a smile. Maybe. Why? I shrugged, just wondering what it's worth. His eyes flicked away, nervous, and in that moment, I knew he'd already counted my property as his. That night, I wrote it all down in my notebook. Brake line cut. Epoxy in Tom's garage. Midnight meeting. Documents. The picture was clear now. They wanted the house, the money, the security I'd built over 60 years. And they were willing to kill me to get it. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. And when I was finished, neither of them would ever touch a single piece of what was mine. As I closed the notebook, I heard footsteps upstairs. My son's voice, low, talking on the phone again. I couldn't catch every word, but one thing was clear. There was someone else. Another voice in the shadows. And if I thought the betrayal couldn't cut deeper, I was about to learn how wrong I was. The papers from Tom's garage lay open on my table. My son's handwriting, the numbers, the timeline, it was all there, proof of what they wanted. But there was something else. In the corner of one page, written in smaller letters, was a name. At first, I thought it was just a note. But the more I stared at it, the more my stomach twisted. Clark. I knew that name. Daniel Clark. My lawyer. The man who'd handle my will, my house deed, my accounts of the last 15 years. I trusted him with everything. The next morning, I walked into his office. He stood from behind his desk, smiling like always. Robert, what brings you in? Everything all right. I forced a smile. Just tying up loose ends. Thought I'd check on my paperwork. Of course, he said, moving to the cabinet. We can review everything. He pulled my file, thick with pages. Wills, property deeds, account details. All neatly organized, all locked with his signature. Everything is current, he said. Nothing to worry about. But I noticed something. A second folder on his desk. Open, just enough for me to see the name on top. My son's name. My throat tightened. New client. I asked casually. He quickly shut the folder. Yes, some small matters. Nothing to do with you. But the way he avoided my eyes told me everything. I left the office smiling, shaking his hand like always. But inside, rage burned hotter. It wasn't just my son and Tom. Daniel Clark, the man I paid to protect me, was helping them. That night, I called Jack, told him everything. "Your lawyer?" he said, stunned. "Robert, if that's true, you're in deep. He could shift everything without you even knowing. Deeds, signatures, transfers. He has access." I paced the room, gripping the phone tight. Exactly. And that's why they need him. Tom doesn't know the law. My son doesn't either. But Daniel? He does. He's the one who makes it official. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need evidence. More than what you've got. Catch him talking. Catch him moving papers. Without that, it's just suspicion." He was right. So I made a plan. The following week, I went back to Daniel's office, this time unannounced. His secretary said he was busy, but I pushed through anyway. He was on the phone, his voice low. He didn't notice me at first. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "Once the transfer is in place, it won't matter. He won't fight. He won't be able to." I stepped closer. My shadow stretched across his desk. He looked up, startled, slamming the receiver down. "Robert, I wasn't expecting you." I smiled coldly. "I can see that." He fumbled with his papers, hiding the folder with my son's name again. But I'd heard enough. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Tom Reeves, mechanical sabotage. My son, planner. Daniel Clark, legal execution. 3 names, 3 betrayals." The picture was complete. But then another thought struck me. If Daniel was involved, then this wasn't just about greed. It was about timing, about making sure the house, the money, the accounts all shifted without a fight, which meant one thing. They weren't done trying. A week later, I got my answer. I returned home one evening to find Tom standing on my porch with my son. They were talking quietly, but I caught a few words as I pulled up the driveway. "Next time it has to work." My son nodded. "Daniel says we're ready. All we need is the push." They turned when they saw me, forcing smiles. "Hey, Dad," my son said. "Tom just dropped by." I nodded, pretending I believed them, but my blood boiled. Next time, they were planning again. That night, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. The first attempt had failed. They wanted another, and this time, Daniel would make sure the paperwork was ready to move the moment I was gone. I clenched my fists. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. But I was watching, and I was waiting, because the next move they made would be their last. The night I heard them whispering about it next time, I knew it was only a matter of days. They had failed once, but they weren't the kind of men to walk away. My son wanted me gone. Tom wanted his cut, and Daniel had the papers ready to make it all official. All they needed was another accident. I started paying closer attention to my son's movements. He left the house late at night. Phone pressed his ear. He returned with excuses, work calls, clients, friends. But his stories never matched. I wrote everything down in my notebook. Dates times excuses. The pattern was clear. Every meeting lined up with Tom or Daniel. They weren't hiding anymore. They thought I was already finished. One afternoon, I found my son in the garage, bent over my old ladder. He looked up, startled. "Just fixing this for you, Dad." Thought I'd help. I stepped closer. The bolts at the base were loose. Not by accident, by hand. If I had climbed that ladder, it would have collapsed in seconds. I met his eyes. He forced a smile. Too quick, too nervous. "You should be more careful, Dad. These old things wear out." I nodded slowly, pretending to believe him. But inside I knew this was a new plan. That night, I drove to Jack's shop. Showed him the photos I'd taken of the ladder, the bolts unscrewed. He shook his head. "Robert, this isn't clumsy work. This is deliberate. He wants another accident." "I know," I said. Jack leaned closer. "Then you can't just sit back. You need proof. Catch them in the act. Otherwise, it's your word against theirs." He was right. But catching them meant letting them try again. And that was a risk I wasn't ready to take. Not yet. Instead, I started building my case. I dug through old files, receipts, deeds. I found changes Daniel had made without telling me. Small adjustments to documents, subtle shifts in language. If I died, everything would have slipped into my son's hands seamlessly. Every line was a blade aimed at my back. I took the papers to Jack. He made copies, storing them safe. If anything happens to you, he said, these go to the police. I nodded. Good. But I'm not done. The next week, I followed Tom. He drove across town, stopped at a small workshop I didn't recognize. I waited in my car, watching. A man came out to meet him, shaking his hand. They spoke in low tones, then walked inside together. I couldn't hear, couldn't see, but I took photos, license plates, faces, timestamps, because now it wasn't just 3 men. There were more. That night, my son came home late. His wife asked where he'd been. He snapped at her, told her to mind her business, then stormed upstairs. I watched from the corner. She had no idea. She thought he was just stressed. She didn't know her husband was planning to kill his own father, and if she ever found out, it would destroy her. I sat in the dark, flipping through my notebook, every page heavier than the last. My son, Tom, Daniel, and now this new man, whoever he was. The web was wider than I thought. The following day, I tested the ladder myself. I tightened the bolts, climbed halfway, then kicked gently at the side. It wobbled violently. Even after my repair, the damage had been done. I climbed down slowly, rage boiling in my chest. He wanted me to fall, break my neck, another accident, and Daniel would have been ready with the papers. That evening, I confronted Tom casually. Funny thing, I said, that ladder of mine nearly gave out yesterday. He stiffened, his face pale. Old wood, Robert. Things were out. I smiled coldly. You'd know, wouldn't you? His eyes flicked away. He muttered an excuse and left. But I'd seen enough. He knew. He was guilty. Back home, I sat across from my son at the dinner table. He shoveled food onto his plate, avoiding my eyes. His wife laughed, trying to keep things normal. But I couldn't look at him the same. Every bite he took, every word he spoke, was poison, because he wasn't my son anymore. He was my enemy. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for them to try again. I was going to turn their plan against them. Catch them not just in lies, not just in whispers, but in the act itself. And when I did, they wouldn't just lose. They'd lose everything. I couldn't get the image out of my head. Tom shaking hands with that stranger outside the workshop. They spoke like old friends, then disappeared inside together. Whoever he wasn't just a passerby. He was part of it. But part of what? The next day, I asked around. Quietly. A man at the hardware store knew the place. That shop, he said, belongs to Eddie Walsh. He's a mechanic. Does side jobs off the books. Not the kind of guy you want to deal with. The name clicked immediately. Years ago, Eddie had worked at a garage near my construction site. He was good with engines, bad with people, always looking for shortcuts, always chasing quick money. Now, he was in business with Tom, and by extension, my son. That night, I drove by the workshop. Lights glowed inside, shadows moving behind the windows. I parked across the street and watched. After a while, the door opened. Tom stepped out, followed by Eddie, and then, to my disgust, my son walked out behind them. The 3 of them stood under the light, talking. Eddie pulled a paper from his pocket, pointing to it. My son nodded, folding it into his jacket. They shook hands and split. I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw tight. Now it was clear, Eddie wasn't just helping. He was the one building their traps. The car, the ladder, and whatever was next. The following morning, I called Jack. Told him everything. Eddie Walsh. Jack spat. That crook? He's been caught skimming parts for years. If he's involved, he's the one doing the dirty work. Your son and Tom point. Eddie pulls the trigger. I nodded, and Daniel covers it legally. 4 of them, all against me. Jack was silent a moment. Then he said, Robert, you can't fight this alone. You need backup. Real backup. I know, I said, But I wasn't ready to go to the police. Not yet. Not without catching them red-handed. So I kept watching. A week later, I followed Eddie. He drove across town, stopping at a supply shop. I stayed back, but when he came out, he carried a box marked with warning labels. Chemicals, adhesives, tools. The same things Jack had shown me under the hood of the wrecked car. He loaded them into his trunk, looked around once, then drove off. I snapped photos, every angle, every detail. Back home, I spread the pictures on the table. Eddie's face, the box, the license plate. The web was getting tighter. But so was my case. That night, my son came into the kitchen. He didn't see me sitting in the dark. He poured himself a drink, dialed his phone. "Yes," he whispered. "Eddie's got it ready. This time he won't walk away." I froze, every nerve on edge. He listened, then laughed softly. "Don't worry. Dad won't know a thing until it's too late." He hung up, set the glass down, and walked upstairs. I stayed in the dark, my fists clenched. So that was their plan. Another setup, another accident, and Eddie Walsh was building it. The next morning, I confronted Tom in passing. "Funny how Eddie's back in town," I said. His eyes flickered. "Yeah, I heard." I smiled thinly. "You always did keep interesting company." He muttered something about errands and walked away fast. But the sweat on his forehead told me everything. That night, I sat with Jack, showing him the new photos. He whistled low. "Robert, this is big. Car sabotage, ladders, chemicals. You've got enough to raise hell already." "Not enough," I said. "Not until I see them do it. Not until I catch them planning the kill." Jack leaned forward. "And what if you're too late?" I stare at the photos, my voice low. Then I make sure they're the ones who fall into their own trap. The following week, I found my chance. My son left his phone on the counter while he stepped into the other room. A message popped up. I didn't touch it, just glanced. It was from Eddie. Everything set. Tomorrow night. My stomach turned. Tomorrow. Whatever they were planning, it was close. I closed my notebook, slipped the photos inside, and locked in the drawer, because if tomorrow was the night, it was also the night I would be ready. The words glowed on the phone screen. Everything set. Tomorrow night. I felt my heart hammer, but I didn't move. I heard his footsteps returning. So I slipped into the shadows, silent. He picked up his phone, glanced at the message, and smiled. That smile told me everything. Tomorrow night, they would try again. The next day, I played dumb. Ate breakfast at the table, asked about his plans. Even wished him luck when he said he was meeting Tom. But inside, I was burning. This time, I wasn't going to wait for the pieces to fall into place. This time, I was going to follow. That evening, I parked down the street as he left the house. He drove straight to Tom's. Minutes later, Daniel's car pulled up, and then Eddie's truck. The four of them together, inside Tom's garage. I crept closer, hugging the shadows until I reached the side window. Voices carried through the thin walls. "Ladder didn't work," my son muttered. "It needs to be final this time." Eddie's voice answered. "It will be. The gas line is ready." One spark, and it's over. My chest tightened. Gas line. They were planning to blow up my house. I gripped the wall, forcing myself steady. Daniel spoke next. "Once it's done, I'll handle the paperwork immediately. The transfer will be clean. By the time anyone asks questions, it'll already be signed." And then Tom, calm as ever. "All we need is him inside when it happens. Tomorrow night, it ends." I stumbled back from the window, breath short. This wasn't just another accident. This was execution. I spent that night pacing the floor, notebook open, pen shaking in my hand. Every page filled with their crimes. The brake line, the ladder, the papers, the phone calls, and now this arson, murder by fire. If I waited, I'd be ashes. But if I moved too soon, I'd lose everything. So I made my choice. I would let them set the trap, let them prepare the match. And then I'd bring the police straight to their door. The next morning, I visited Jack, showed him everything. He shook his head slowly. "Robert, this is enough to bury them. You take this to the cops right now. Not yet. I cut him off. I need them caught in the act. I need them with a match in their hand. So no one could deny it. Jack stared at me. That's dangerous. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong, I said. My voice was steady. Tomorrow night, it ends. All day I prepared. I copied every page of my notebook, every photo, every receipt. One set hidden in Jack's shop, another locked in my drawer. If I didn't make it back, the evidence would. But I wasn't planning on losing. That evening, my son came home whistling. He barely looked at me as he tossed his coat on the chair. His phone buzzed. I caught a glimpse of the screen. Eddie again. He smiled. Big day tomorrow? I asked casually. He froze for a second, then forced a laugh. Just work, Dad. Nothing special. I nodded, sipping my coffee. But inside, I was already setting the stage. That night, I called a detective I trusted, an old friend from years back. I didn't give him details. Not yet. Just enough. Tomorrow night, I said. Tom's garage. Be ready. He hesitated. Robert, if this is just... It's not, I said. My voice was iron. You'll see. I hung up and stared out the window. The snow fell in silence, blanketing the street. My son's light was still on upstairs. He thought tomorrow would be my end. But tomorrow night, I would make sure it was his. The day dragged like a stone. Every tick of the clock sounded louder than the last. I kept my face calm, but inside, every nerve was alive with fire. They thought tonight would be the night I burned. But tonight, it was going to end on my terms. I left the house just after sunset, telling my son I was meeting Jack for a drink. He barely looked up from his phone. Don't wait up, I said. He only muttered, Sure, Dad. If only he knew. I drove across town, stopping at the old diner where I'd arranged to meet Detective Harris. He was already there, leaning in the booth, coffee steaming in front of him. You'd better be right, he said when I sat down. I slid the envelope across the table. Inside were copies of photos, receipts, and notes from my notebook. Every word is true, I said. And tonight, you'll see it for yourself. He scanned the papers, his frown deepening. Gas line? Arson? This is serious, Robert. If we go in, we need them on tape. Planning. Preparing. Attempting. I nodded. You'll have it. Trust me. By 9, we were parked a block from Tom's garage. 2 unmarked cars behind us, officers waiting inside. Snow crunched underfoot as Harris checked his gear. Stay in the car, he told me, if this goes bad. I'm not sitting this out. I said, this is my fight. He studied me, then finally nodded. Fine, but you stay behind me. At 10 sharp, headlights swept across the street. Tom's truck. Moments later, Eddie's, then Daniel's sleek sedan. And finally, my son's car. One by one, they pulled up to the garage. The door rolled open. The 4 of them slipped inside. I held my breath. From our spot, we could see shadows moving across the lit windows. Voices carried faintly through the night. Gas line runs on the back wall. Eddie's voice said, We open it, one spark. The whole place goes up. Are you sure it'll look like an accident? My son asked, his voice tight. Daniel replied smoothly, It'll be perfect. Fire department will call it faulty wiring. By the time they know better, the deed will be signed. Tom's laugh rumbled. About time we finish this. No more mistakes. Detective Harris shot me a look. That's enough. He spoke into his radio. Move in. Officers slipped from the shadows, surrounding the building. The garage door rattled, then burst open. Police, hands where we can see them. Chaos erupted inside. Eddie dropped the wrench in his hand. Tom froze mid-step. Daniel's face went white. And my son, my own blood, stared at me in the doorway. His eyes were wide, his mouth open, his body stiff like stone. Dad, he whispered. I said nothing. The officers rushed in, pinning them against the wall, slapping cuffs on their wrists. The sound of metal closing echoed like thunder. My son tried to speak, but the words tumbled out broken. It's not what it looks like. Detective Harris shoved the papers from the table into a bag. Schematics of the gas line, notes in Daniel's handwriting, a list of dates. It's exactly what it looks like, Harris said coldly. As they dragged him out, Eddie snarled, "You'll regret this, Miller." I met his eyes, calm. "No, you will." Daniel kept quiet, his face gray. Tom muttered curses under his breath. And my son, he looked at me, tears brimming, lips trembling. "You set me up," he hissed. I leaned closer, my voice low. "No, you set yourself up." The officers loaded them into the cars, doors slamming shut. The street fell silent again, snow drifting in the cold air. Detective Harris turned to me. "You did good, Robert. Real good. But this isn't over yet. You will have to testify. You ready for that?" I stared at the garage, where just minutes ago they'd been plotting my death. I nodded. I've been ready since Christmas night. Back home, the house was quiet. My son's wife sat in the living room, waiting. When she saw me alone, her face paled. "Where is he?" she whispered. I sat down across from her, heavy with the truth. "He's not coming home tonight." She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. The night ended with flashing lights and handcuffs. My son, Tom, Daniel, and Eddie were shoved into the backs of police cars, their faces pale, their voices drowned out by the slam of steel doors. I stood in the snow, watching as they disappeared down the street. For the first time since Christmas, I could breathe. They had planned my death. They had set every trap. But in the end, it was them who walked into mine. When I came home, the house was silent. The lights were soft, the warmth of the fire filling the room. I poured myself a glass, sat at the table, and let the quiet sink in. It was over. I had won, and they would never take another thing from me again.